Poverty, tragedy in the family, earthquakes, wars, prejudice, and many mistakes were not able to stop a dream of an 8-year-old child that through much suffering and perseverance managed to build a world empire. In this video, you will learn the complete story of this boy's trajectory and what he did to succeed. Let's walk through this inspiring story that will encourage you to never give up on your dreams. Welcome to the Honda world. First of all, Japan is a tiny country about the size of Germany, but it has always been brave and a fighter just like its people. Between 1904 and 1905, the Japanese fought for their lives in the famous Russian-Japanese War. The fight was territorial. The two countries disputed the territories of Manchuria, Port Arthur on the Liaodong Peninsula, and Korea. The Japanese Navy defeated the enemy, marking an accession of Japan as a power that helped in the decay of the Tsarist regime that dominated Russia. The country gained respect from the war. The period was also marked by hunger and poverty. Despite the population growth and the exodus of people from the countryside to the big cities searching for jobs in emerging industries, agriculture was losing space to industry. The birth of Soichiro. A year after the war, Soichiro Honda was born in 1906 in a poor village called Shizuko near Mount Fuji. His father, Geisha Honda, was a blacksmith, and his mother, Mika Honda, worked as a weaver. The couple was suffering the consequences of a post-war and rising country. At the time, Japan started to have many industries, and the workers had difficulties going to the companies because vehicles were not accessible. The cheapest way was the bicycle, so the country was infested by them. Geisha Honda saw an opportunity and opened a machine shop to repair this popular means of transportation. Family tragedies. The Honda family grew up a lot. They had 8 children, but 5 died due to health problems. Soichiro watched his brothers die when he was growing up, which considerably shook the family. Where his father worked was a mixture of home and workshop, giving a dreamy boy the opportunity to have contact with gears and tools. Ford Model T, the car that marked the boy's life. Soichiro grew up watching his father work in the bicycle shop. He was not like other children who spent their days playing. When he was 8 years old, he had an encounter with a machine that changed his life forever. He was walking through a neighborhood when the boy heard a noise that he had never heard before. Soichiro ran to see what it was. It was at this moment that he saw a car for the first time. The smell of burning oil was perfume to him, and he remembered it throughout his life. He was fascinated and could not understand how the vehicle drove itself without the help of horses. The car was a Ford Model T, the first Ford vehicle released in October 1908. Soichiro was ecstatic and started running after the car. This encounter stayed in his mind forever. Thief and forger. Soichiro didn't like school. He only wanted to help his father in the workshop. His lack of interest in his studies was so significant that he started getting terrible grades. The schools in Japan at that time were already rigorous, and the parents received a report card at the end of each semester to see the performance of their children and then sign it. As it was the child who took the paper, Soichiro, even at such a young age, had thought of a solution to circumvent the system. He took a piece of rubber from a bicycle pedal and made a copy of his parents' stamp and began to stamp the report card. The hoax worked to the point where his classmates asked for seals, which was the end. The name Honda was easy to make on the stamp, but the names of some friends were more complex, presenting flaws, and the hoax was discovered. When his father learned of his son's cleverness, he left him on his knees all day without lunch. In 1917, Soichiro learned that a great stunt pilot named Art Smith would make a performance at the biplane. The event was away from home and paid for. Still, he had no money, so he went into his father's workshop, took some money from his drawer and a bicycle, and rode for 20 kilometers to the military camps. When he went to buy an admission, he realized that the money was little. But Soichiro was thoughtful and always had a solution. He climbed a tree to watch the presentation and was amazed by the flying machine. When he got home, his father discovered everything he had done, but he didn't fight with him this time. Still, he was proud to see his son's effort and determination for mechanics. A big disappointment. In 1922, while he was in his father's workshop, he saw a newspaper and an ad caught his eye. It was an advertisement for a car repair shop in Tokyo, the Art Shokai. He then thought that there might be a job there. Soichiro wrote a letter to the owner. The answer didn't take long and was positive. The country boy was about to go to the big city, and that was just when he had left school. Even though he was a minor, his parents did not forbid him to go because they trusted their son's determination. When he arrived, he was dazzled by the structure and crowded streets. In the workshop, whose owner was Yuzo Sakakibara, he learned that his role in in the company would be to wash, cook, and, most of all, take care of Yuzo's youngest son. Even though he didn't like what he was doing, Soichiro obeyed his boss's orders until his chance came. Nothing would make him go back to his father's workshop. The lucky earthquake. The same year he arrived in Tokyo, an earthquake happened in the countryside where many mechanics from the Art Shokai workshop lived, and they had to rush to rebuild their homes. Unlucky for some, but it was lucky for Soichiro. Demand in the workshop was high, and with fewer mechanics, Yuzo gave Soichiro a chance because cars and bicycles were repaired. He began with simple tasks and gradually gained the trust of his boss. Yuzo taught the young man how to run a mechanic's shop, race, blessing, and curse. Soichiro soon became a good and reliable mechanic. The workshop grew and they worked with many makes of cars of the time. Even racing cars appeared in the store, and Yuzo was very fond of these vehicles. One day, the shop owner decided to build racing cars. He took parts from several other vehicles, including the American Mitchell, and created the Art Daimler. After a lot of trial and error, they won the Japanese championship in 1924. At this time, Soichiro's brother living with him in Tokyo was the driver, and Soichiro was the co-driver in the race. When age and likes get in the way. In 1926, the young mechanic was called up for the army, and lucky for him, he did not pass because he was colorblind. His boss opened a branch shop in Hamamatsu, and Soichiro was chosen as manager. The branch failed, and he left the store when he found out why. The customers did not confide in him because he was too young. When he returned to Tokyo, he continued with Yuzo. Still, he opened his company and multiplied, soon reaching 30 employees. At this point, he made a lot of money and started to profit from it. There are many historical accounts of the crazy life he led. He spent with prostitutes, drank a lot, danced, throwing money around, and it is said that he even danced naked at his wedding. Soichiro was a guy who worked hard, but he also partied. On a night out, he was drunk and accidentally pushed a geisha woman through a second-story window. Luckily for him, the woman survived by hanging from power lines in the street. To get the woman out, they had to cut off the electricity distribution, and the night was one of the severe blackouts. As the company grew, he called his wife to help in the administration. It was close. Soichiro was not only a good mechanic, but also a great racing driver. He built his Hamamatsu racing company wanting to reach 120 kilometers per hour in his car. This record was broken in 20 years later in Japan. Racing cars were cans without any safety. They thought more about the engine than the driver. In 1936, Soichiro was involved in a severe accident that almost killed him. He broke his arm, injured his shoulders, and was scarred forever on his face, so he spent 3 months in the hospital. 4 months after the accident, he returned to the track, but his wife and father convinced him to give up his racing career. Back to the workshop. In the same year as the accident, he returned to his workshop. He realized a tremendous demand for automobile parts and decided to manufacture them. He needed help convincing his partners. Ultimately, he decided to start the company by himself to manufacture piston rings. The company was called Tokai Seiki Heavy Industry, but was still under Art Shokai. He put his good friend Shichiro Kato in charge of the company. With a lot of effort and mistakes, they created Art Piston Ring Research Center and did a lot of research. For years, they suffered to the point where Soichiro became very thin and weak. This almost destroyed him as he worked at Hamamatsu during the day and at night at his company, and to try to find a way out, he went after ignorance. He enrolled at Hamamatsu Industrial Institute to learn more about metallurgy, the great creation that Toyota liked. In 1939, Soichiro managed to create the piston he so desired. Confident in what he made, he resigned from Art Shokai, delivered the project to one of his employees, and started working full-time in his company. They worked day and night to reach perfection. Toyota contacted Soichiro to make pistons. He made 50 pistons for Toyota, but only 3 were approved. A significant loss, but this didn't make him give up. He spent years traveling around Japan researching, entering workshops and factories to acquire more knowledge and improve his product. He even attended college classes but never finished a course. After a long time, he decided to try again and the company took off. His new piston was approved and sales were so high that he quickly reached the incredible 2,000 employees to meet the demand. He began to dream big, but something terrible was about to happen. Toyota was not the only company Honda partnered with. In 1928, Soichiro completed a project with Ford, creating the first Honda Ford. The car was a race car and managed to break some records. The destruction. Japan started the Pacific War in 1941, and Soichiro's company was controlled by the Ministry of Munitions. By the following year, Toyota owned 45% of the company, and Soichiro lost his position as president to a director. During the war, many employees were drafted, and the company began to suffer losses. No matter how hard he tried, the destruction of his dreams was before his eyes, and the worst was yet to come. In 1944, the war intensified, and Japan already knew it would lose. This year, Soichiro's factory was hit by bombs and totally destroyed. And to make matters worse, in 1945, an earthquake in Nakai destroyed what was left of another company. In August 1945, Japan surrendered, and Soichiro lost almost everything. After the war, he sold what was left to Toyota for 450,000 yen. He told everyone he would take a hiatus to think about what to do because the country was in ruins. The big idea. A year after the war, the country still suffered from economic problems. Essential products were lacking, including fuel. Factories were hiring, but the employees needed cheaper transportation to the companies. One day, he was walking through the ruins of the war and found an energy-generating machine that belonged to the Japanese army. The device was used to recharge the soldiers' radio controls. Soichiro was amazed by his find, and as he was curious, he went to see how it worked, and a great idea came to his mind. He thought, what happens if you put this machine on a bicycle? This already existed in Europe, and even some examples were seen in Japan, but Soichiro's idea was to realize that the country urgently needed cheaper and more economical transportation. In 1946, he used his old Honda Technical Research Institute shed to start his new project. There was no cement for sale to remodel his shed, so he made his own cement. Nothing could stop this man. The idea was to build a motorcycle. He gathered 12 employees and started working, got some parts he had, and succeeded in assembling his first motorcycle. Still, he had no engine for so much demand that he decided to manufacture his machine, the FIRSTBORN. In 1947, Soichiro assembled Type A, and for the first time, the name Honda was put on a machine. In 1948, he founded the Honda Motor Company to offer cheap transportation to Japanese workers. Still, he had a problem. There needed to be more money to manufacture in scale. The shape of the letter in the logo Honda, which is thick at the bottom and thin at the top, symbolizes arms raised towards the sky and inspires people to run after their dreams. Soichiro had the idea to write a letter to the 18,000 store owners in Japan, saying that he had found a solution to get the country back to normality. Only 3,000 business owners responded positively, so he got money for his first production line. With the money, the company made its first complete motorcycle, the Model D. Curious, he used 500 Tohatsu engines to build his first motorcycle. As soon as they were sold, Soichiro produced copies of these engines and sold them to people to attach to their bicycles. Soichiro formed a prosperous partnership with Takeo Fujisawa and grew the company together. Takeo took care of business and marketing. One of the company's missions has always been to offer cheap, quality products to the world. Headaches. The bike was big, expensive, and heavy. Only some could afford it. Because of this problem, Soichiro spent 3 years developing a lighter, cheaper bike. Soichiro created the Super Cub, and the cycle was so successful that it even won an Emperor's Award. Later, Honda received investment from Takeo Fujisawa, providing what Soichiro needed to create the Honda Motor Company. United States. In the early 1960s in the United States, the image of bikers was tarnished. Those who rode motorcycles were labeled as thick and quarrelsome. Honda wanted to change that when it arrived with its first store in California, hiring 8 people with high sales. The "You Meet the Nicest People on a Honda" campaign generated trust, encouraging families and young people to like the bike. In 1958, the Super Cub arrived in the United States at $295. It was significantly cheaper than other motorcycles sold in the country and soon passed the sales of big brands like Harley-Davidson. Honda was the first Japanese brand to set foot in North America with a factory in Ohio. Soichiro had never given up racing and sought benefits from it. He invested in racing again, this time on a motorcycle. Still, first he traveled around the world to observe all the competitors' races and motorcycles and collected a lot of information, then gathered it all together and went to study. This took Honda from a poor placing in the first race in 1954 to big awards in 1959. 2 years later, Honda won the race, and the eyes of the world turned to the brand. The races were a way for the brand to gain confidence because at first, it took a lot of work to make people trust a product of a post-war brand with strange models compared to other brands. In World War II, the United States conquered Japan, and decades later, Japan dominated the United States in vehicle sales. Back to the age of 8. In 1960, Honda became the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world. They had manufactured 10 million motorcycles by 1968. However, Soichiro still needed to be satisfied, as his dream was to manufacture cars when he was 8 years old. When Soichiro announced he would enter the four-wheeler market, many warned him against doing so. Japan already had cars from Nissan and Toyota, and many tried to convince him that the country didn't need another automaker. 1963. Honda made his first car, the T360 Mini Trunk. He had learned from motorcycles that initially making something big and expensive was a bad start, but the car could have been more successful. And only after the second car, the S500, which was sporty, did things begin to change. The S500 was a car that went 80 miles per hour. It was fast and good, but only 1,300 units were manufactured. It was the rarest product of the brand. Soichiro put his cars into racing. He made the Honda RA 271 and participated in Formula One in Belgium in 1964. After a year, they won first place in Mexico in 1965 with another successful car, the Honda RA 272. The brand holds trophies from various racing disciplines, whether motorcycle or car. The Great CIVIC. Honda was successful in the races, but not in the streets. That's when they decided to stop racing and focus on urban projects. This way, they managed to build the most successful car of the brand, the Honda Civic, which became one of the most popular in the world. One of the things that made the car so successful was the high price of oil in 1970. And to help the problem, Soichiro created the Compound Vortex Controlled Combustion, or CVCC. This made the Civic very economical and without the use of catalytic converters. At the same time, it helped the tremendous environmental concern of the time. The Civic didn't pollute much and was the solution in the fuel crisis. The car arrived at the right time because the anti-pollution campaigns and laws were growing wildly in the United States. Soichiro hired 15 engineers to make his cars anti-polluting. Even though the Civic had been very successful, the Honda Accord changed everything. The car started as a 3-door 8C, then became a 4-door sedan. This model had the same technologies as the Civic, but with much more interior space. In a short time, it became the best sedan in the world. Accord was the first car of the brand to drive 1 million miles with its owner Joe Cicero. He got a new one as a gift. By 1979, Honda was building partnerships in Europe with BL, sharing technology to develop cars for Europeans. By the early 1980s, Honda was the third largest car manufacturer in Japan, and by the end of the decade, the third largest on the planet with plants all over the world. Did you know that Honda was the first to use GPS in a car? In 1981, the company created the first GPS system, the Honda Electro-Gyrocator, which was put in the Accord, but only after a decade did other vehicles begin to use the technology. The first four-wheel drive car was the 1987 Honda Prelude. Since then, Honda has become one of the leading manufacturers of four-wheel drive vehicles. The luxury and timeline. Already in the United States, Honda decided to launch a new luxury brand and called it Acura. It was the first Japanese brand to launch premium cars in the country. In 1988, McLaren Honda won 15 out of 16 Formula One races. The Brazilian Ayrton Senna was the F1 world champion in 1988, and his teammate Alain Prost was runner-up. In 1989, Honda showed the world how to make a robust and economic engine with the VTEC system. The brand popularity grew so much in the 60s that even a music band was created under the name Honda. The band Hondells was American, and the style appealed to Sufi rockers. The producers were Brian Wilson and Mike Love. The band's biggest hit was a song called Little Honda, and it reached 9th place on U.S. radio. In 1999, the engineers were focused on more than just the past. They created the first gasoline-electric hybrid with incredibly low CO2 emissions. It was another Honda, the first hybrid car put on sale in Europe. In 2000, the first humanoid robot, Asimo, advanced step in innovative mobility, appeared and became one of Honda's most famous celebrities. People started dreaming about robots doing human tasks everywhere. In 2006, Honda became the leading engine supplier for IndyCar. The same year, at the Indianapolis 500, the brand succeeded in participating in a season without failure in its engines. In 2014, Honda introduced wind turbines. Honda Transmission MFG of America turns on its new wind turbines in Russell's Point, Ohio. Honda was the first to use this energy in its factories. In 2015, Honda literally took off. Soichiro's greatest dream is realized. The first production Honda jet took to the skies. The 6-passenger business jet has a range of over 2,200 kilometers, with a top speed of 782 kilometers per hour, is the fastest Honda ever built. In the same year the company was sued, Honda was fined $70 million for failing to prevent deaths caused by defects in some of its products. Retirement and death. Honda's expansion strategy relied on an excellent structure in its factories, making each one independent and manufacturing everything it needed. The engineers had a voice and the freedom to create vehicles according to the needs of each country. The employees were well treated and well paid, so the company grew. The investments in the production lines at the factories made Honda build cars in hours, while competitors could take more than a month. Soichiro valued people so much that he only used robots in his factories for dangerous jobs. Soichiro retired after 25 years as president of Honda. Even in retirement, he kept an eye on business. On August 5, 1991, Soichiro Honda died from liver failure before the Hungarian Grand Prix. He was 84 years old when he died. The winner, Ayrton Senna of Brazil, dedicated the victory to the late Soichiro Honda. Honda products. The brand's most important product has always been motorcycles, but in addition to cars, the company has consolidated its designs on land, air, and sea. More than 150 Honda product patents have been registered throughout its history. Soichiro proved that there are no problems that cannot be solved. Everything depends on the study and a good idea. His life and determination serve as examples that a dream, no matter how absurd, can be realized. All my success came from the 1% that I got right. Soichiro Honda, 1906 to 1991. Learn which companies collaborated and grew up with Nazism by clicking on this on-screen video. Thanks for watching and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one.